Here is a piece of foam, because today we are venturing back into Warhammer and making a World Eaters versus the Inquisition battle. And we are starting by laboriously cutting our diorama up with some clippers so that we can make the foundation of the diorama, which is going to be set in a somewhat medieval landscape. And for the first time ever, I'm going to be adding some base rims to the project so that my Warhammer minis can easily slot in. Spoilers, this ends up being a lot harder than I thought, but we all need to try and start new things once in a while. But I've been yapping for too long, let's quickly move on to clay time, where we can grab our air drying clay and start to mould our diorama. I've also wetted the diorama with some water as will make the clay more mouldable, and we can really easily squish those bases in. And next it's time to flatten this clay out, as we're going to be adding a cobblestone road going through the centre of this diorama. And using this cobblestone roller is actually a lot harder than it looks. You really got to make sure you get the pressure even as you push all the way through the clay. But I'm going to overlap all the mistakes I made with some more clay later on. And later on means now, as it's time for Smart Mud 2.0, which is an amazing clay mud that, as it says on the tin, looks like mud. This is one of the stickiest substances known to man, so that's why I like to use gloves as it won't stick to my fingers. I'm also going to slightly add it over that cobblestone road to make it look like it's starting to be overgrown. And to start making this smart mud look a little bit more believable, it's time to grab some real sand out of my pockets and pour it all over the diorama. I also use some foam flocking, which is basically tiny bits of cut up foam to act as leaves and other debris across the grass. I then used isopropyl alcohol and some white glue to make sure everything is nice and stuck down. And when it comes to priming your diorama, you want to make sure just to hit it from the top, and really make sure not to get any on the foam itself, as that will dissolve all of that XPS foam. The clays we put on top are super absorbent, so that's why you see me adding so much spray paint on top. And next we are painting the infamous World Eaters Berserkers. And we have to do the most important thing when making Chaos Marines, and that's adding some great battle damage to his armour. I started by getting my hobby knife and making nice little cuts away into all the edges of his armour panels. And swiftly moving on, we can create the base of the model, making it out of some clay and foam flocking, and after a quick prime we can start painting him in corn red, and then slowly adding some vermilion red, and creating sketch-like patterns all over the armour to add highlights. I did this mainly by stippling, but that leads us to the dreaded trim, which I painted in my favourite paint, Decayed Metal. I then painted his chainsword and wire silver. However, if you really want a much more in-depth video, I made a whole video showcasing this. This is more the highlight reel. Next it's time to paint his gloves in Black Legion, and all of the leather parts in Cygor Brown, before quickly heading back to paint the skulls, where we can now add black enamel wash all over that miniature. As I forgot to paint his arm, let's quickly do that, and I want to add some more red highlight just to make the miniature start to pop. And after painting his base, which I'll show you how to do later, there he is, a wonderfully angry red boy. Which means we need to build and paint his counterpart, and that is Ostromandeus, the Imperial Inquisitor. And to start, I made his base in the same exact way we made the diorama earlier, which means it's time to prime him black with a Xenophil highlight of white on top. Then we can start to paint the cape and making sure to highlight all of those edges, before we can quickly paint all of the under armour black, and realise I forgot to put the lid on my Rhinox hide. Then we can paint the silver, and it's time to focus up and paint the red. And once that was done, it's time to paint that pale skin, and then quickly move on to all the gold accents. Then I painted all the furs in some contrast paints, and then painted the power sword. A quick dot of green for the eyes, and then it's time to move on to enamel time. After that it's time to finish painting the base, and of course if you want a more in-depth tutorial on how I painted this Inquisitor, click at the top right or just check the channel out. And now we can move back onto the diorama. So it's about that time in the diorama where it's time to build some fences. And I grabbed this about 1/2 centimetre thick balsa wood sticks and cut them to be about 1.5 centimetres each. Then I cut one of those sticks in half lengthways to make a nice support between the two sticks, using some super glue to bond it all together. And to make these fences look a little bit more than just balsa sticks, I grabbed my clippers and cut all the edges off and generally tried to scuff it up as much as I could. Then after interlacing all of the wooden sticks together, it's time to put them back on the diorama. And it's time to quickly paint these fences. For this I started with Wildwood, but it was too much of a dark brown, it was almost a black. So I quickly switched to Sigil Brown, which is also a contrast paint, and it did a really nice job in highlighting a nice brown wood. And before we get onto airbrushing all over the ground, I decided to paint this nice little cobblestone pathway in a light grey. In hindsight, I really didn't need to, but you never know, it could have added some texture along the way. And when it comes to airbrushing this grass, I chose Mantis Warriors Green, which is a lovely contrast paint, which I think really nicely resembles a lovely summer spring tone. And my actual airbrush compressor is locked at just over 30 FPS because the handle broke off, so that's why the paint is shooting out super fast. And after airbrushing, I realised there's pretty much only just one colour and there's not much variation, so I whacked out some of that Sigil Brown, the same as the wooden posts, and sporadically spotted it all around the diorama, then with a very wet brush, dabbed it all in. Then I grabbed a black enamel wash and I poured this all over the cobblestone path, just so we can start to see some of that detail. And this is one of the more laborious tasks of the diorama. All those little green flocks of foam we poured on earlier, we're going to paint with a nice lime green. This is going to act as some leaves on the ground, and it's going to really break up that brown and green texture on the ground. Then I painted the holes where the miniatures are going to go in some black primer, and it's finally time to paint the last details of this diorama, and that is that cobblestone path. And I started with a really nice warm grey, and slowly highlighted it up on each of these individual cobblestone pieces, trying not to get any in those cracks, so it adds a nice bit of variety in those highlights and shadows. This was a really odd diorama project for me, as I really wanted to see if I could implement two miniatures without taking them off their bases. In hindsight, I think it was a win and a failure at the same time. I've learnt a lot and I love to see what I do next time. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe because it really does help me out. I'm Ben Reese and I'll see you in the next one.